welcome back to Shadowy Delights. Tonight we have a compilation of horror stories set to the relaxing sound of rain to help you fall asleep. Let us know in the comments if you want more videos like this. And just for fun, let us know where you're listening from. If you're new, don't forget to subscribe. Now let's get into tonight's Shadowy Delights. This happened a couple of years ago, and it still haunts me to this day. I was living alone in a small, quiet neighborhood, the kind where everyone knows each other but still respects privacy. It was a rainy night, one of those nights where the sound of the rain hitting the roof was supposed to be soothing, but it ended up being anything but. I had just finished watching a movie and was about to head to bed when I heard a knock on the door. It was close to midnight, and I wasn't expecting anyone. The knock was firm but not aggressive, just enough to get my attention. My heart started racing. Who could be knocking at this hour? I hesitated for a moment, debating whether to answer it or not. Eventually, I decided to peek through the peephole. All I could see was darkness. The porch light was off, and the rain made it hard to see anything clearly. I stood there for a moment, listening to the rain and the occasional rumble of thunder, hoping whoever it was would just go away. But then, the knock came again, louder this time. I took a deep breath and asked who it was, but there was no response. My heart was pounding in my chest. I decided to check the window, thinking maybe I could get a better view from there. I pulled back the curtain slightly and saw a shadowy figure standing on my porch. They were just standing there, not moving, not saying anything. I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. I considered calling the police, but what would I tell them? That there was someone standing on my porch? I decided to wait it out, hoping they would leave. I sat on the floor in my living room, clutching my phone, listening to the rain and my own breathing. After what felt like an eternity, I heard footsteps moving away from the porch. I waited a few more minutes, just to be sure, before getting up and locking the door securely. I checked all the windows, making sure they were locked too. I finally allowed myself to breathe, thinking it was over. But then, I heard a faint tapping on the window behind me. I froze. I didn't want to turn around, but I had to. Slowly, I turned to face the window, and there they were. The shadowy figure was standing right outside, tapping on the glass. I couldn't see their face, just the outline of their body. I backed away, my mind racing with fear. I ran to my bedroom, locked the door, and hid in the closet. I called the police, whispering into the phone, trying not to make any noise. I could still hear the tapping, persistent and haunting. The operator assured me that help was on the way, but it felt like forever. Eventually, I heard the sound of sirens and the tapping stopped. The police arrived and searched the area, but they didn't find anyone. They told me it was probably just some prankster, but I knew it was something more than that. I never found out who it was or what they wanted. I moved out of that house soon after and have never looked back. But every time it rains, I can't help but remember that night and the figure standing outside my window. I'm Sarah. I want to share with you a night I will never forget. It happened last summer when I was on a road trip across the country. I love driving, the sense of freedom and adventure, but that night, the adventure turned into a nightmare. It was a rainy evening, and I was somewhere in the middle of nowhere. The road was deserted, and the rain was coming down hard, making it difficult to see. I was getting tired and decided to stop at the first motel I could find. After driving for what seemed like hours, I finally saw a flickering neon sign for a roadside motel. It looked a bit run down, but I didn't care. I just wanted a place to sleep. I pulled into the parking lot and went inside to check in. The lobby was empty, and there was an eerie silence, except for the sound of the rain. I rang the bell on the counter, and after a few moments, an old man appeared from the back room. He handed me a key without saying a word. His expression was blank, and his eyes seemed distant. It gave me chills, but I brushed it off, thinking he was just a peculiar old man. My room was at the far end of the motel, away from the road. As I walked to my room, I noticed that the other rooms were all dark. It seemed like I was the only guest. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was small and shabby, but it was dry, and that was all that mattered at the moment. I locked the door behind me and sat on the bed, listening to the rain. There was something unsettling about the place, but I was too tired to care. I turned on the TV to drown out the silence, but the signal was weak, and all I got was static. I decided to just go to sleep. I was drifting off when I heard a noise outside. It sounded like footsteps, but I told myself it was just the rain. Then, I heard a soft knock on my door. My heart skipped a beat. Who could it be at this hour? I stayed silent, hoping they would go away. But the knocking continued, growing louder and more insistent. I got up and looked through the peephole, but all I could see was darkness. I didn't dare open the door. I backed away, trying to figure out what to do. The knocking stopped, but then I heard the sound of someone trying to open the door. The doorknob rattled, and I could hear whispers, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. I grabbed my phone and called the front desk, but there was no answer. I felt trapped, not knowing what to do. The door rattled again, and I could hear the whispers getting louder. I was terrified. I dialed 911 and told the operator what was happening. They assured me that help was on the way, but it felt like an eternity. I stayed on the phone with the operator, whispering, trying to keep calm. The rattling stopped, and I heard footsteps moving away from my door. A few minutes later, I heard the sound of sirens. The police arrived and searched the area, but they didn't find anyone. They told me it was probably just some kids playing a prank, but I knew it was more than that. I checked out of the motel first thing in the morning and continued my journey. I never stopped at another roadside motel again. The memory of that night still haunts me, and every time it rains, I can't help but feel that fear all over again. I've got a story for you that's been keeping me up at night. It happened a few months ago when I moved into a new apartment. It was a cute little place in an old building, and I was excited to start fresh. But there was one thing about the apartment that I didn't like: the basement. The landlord told me that each tenant had a storage unit in the basement, and that I could use it to store anything I didn't need in the apartment. The basement was old and musty, with flickering lights and a damp smell. It gave me the creeps, but I figured I'd only have to go down there occasionally. One evening, I was unpacking and decided to take some boxes down to the basement. It was raining outside, and the sound of the rain was comforting. I grabbed the boxes and headed down the creaky stairs to the basement. The lights flickered as I walked, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I found my storage unit and put the boxes inside. As I was about to leave, I heard a noise. It sounded like a faint whisper, but I couldn't make out the words. I froze, listening intently, but the noise stopped. I told myself it was just the old building settling and hurried back upstairs. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the basement. Every time I went down there, I felt like I was being watched. I tried to ignore it, but the feeling persisted. One night, I decided to face my fears and see if I could figure out what was going on. I grabbed a flashlight and headed down to the basement. The rain was pouring outside, and the sound echoed through the building. The lights flickered as usual, and I made my way to my storage unit. I stood there, listening, trying to hear the whisper again. And then I heard it. It was faint, but it was there. A soft, raspy whisper, coming from the far end of the basement. My heart pounded in my chest, but I forced myself to move towards the sound. As I got closer, the whisper became clearer. It was saying my name. I shone my flashlight around, but there was nothing there. Just old storage units and cobwebs. I was about to turn back when I noticed a small door at the very end of the basement. It was partially open, and the whisper seemed to be coming from inside. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Inside, there was a small, dark room, barely big enough to stand in. The whisper stopped, and the room was silent except for the sound of the rain. I shone my flashlight around, but there was nothing in the room. Just an empty, cold space. I felt a chill run down my spine and decided to get out of there. I closed the door and hurried back to my apartment, my mind racing. I didn't sleep that night, and the next day, I told the landlord about the door and the whispers. He looked at me strangely and told me there was no door at the end of the basement. I was confused and scared. I went back down to the basement to show him, but the door was gone. It was just a solid wall. I moved out of that apartment as soon as I could. To this day, I don't know what I heard or saw in that basement, but I know it was real. Every time it rains, I can't help but think about that whisper, calling my name. This happened during a road trip I took a few years back. I love driving long distances, just me and the open road. This particular trip was from my home in California to visit a friend in Texas. It was a long drive, but I was excited about it. Little did I know, it would turn into a nightmare. I was somewhere in Arizona, on a deserted stretch of highway, when I noticed a car following me. At first, I didn't think much of it, but after a while, it became clear that they were matching my speed, keeping a distance but never overtaking me. I tried to brush it off as a coincidence, but as the hours passed, I started to get uneasy. It was late afternoon when I decided to stop at a rest area to stretch my legs and use the bathroom. The car pulled in too, parking a few spaces away. I got out and quickly went inside, trying to stay calm. When I came back out, the car was still there, but the driver, a man in his 40s, was now leaning against it, watching me. I got back in my car and drove off, hoping he'd stay behind. But he didn't. He followed me, and now he was getting closer. I tried speeding up, slowing down, but nothing worked. Panic set in, and I started looking for an exit or a place with more people. But this stretch of road was empty, just miles and miles of nothing. I remembered my dad's advice for situations like this: never go home if you're being followed. So I didn't head towards my friend's place. Instead, I kept driving, hoping to find a town or a gas station. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I saw a sign for a small town up ahead. I took the exit, and to my relief, the car kept going straight. I pulled into a gas station and just sat there, trying to calm my nerves. I called my friend and told her what had happened. She insisted I stay the night at a nearby motel and drive the rest of the way in the morning. I found a motel and checked in, locking the door behind me and double-checking the windows. I felt safer but still on edge. That night, I barely slept, jumping at every noise. The next morning, I got back on the road, constantly checking my mirrors. I made it to my friend's house without any more incidents, but the experience stayed with me. It's a reminder of how quickly things can turn from a fun adventure to a terrifying ordeal. Now, I always plan my routes more carefully and make sure I have a plan if something like that ever happens again. What I'm about to tell you happened last year. It was the kind of thing you hear about but never think will happen to you. I live in a small apartment in the city, and I work late hours, often getting home around midnight. It started with small things, feeling like I was being watched, hearing footsteps behind me on my walk home, little stuff that you can easily brush off. But then it escalated. One night, I got home and found a note slipped under my door. It simply said, "I see you." My heart skipped a beat, and I tried to tell myself it was just some prank. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I started being more cautious, looking over my shoulder more often, locking my door the moment I got inside. Then I began noticing things out of place in my apartment. At first, it was minor: an open drawer, a moved chair. But one night, I came home to find my front door unlocked. I knew I had locked it before leaving. I went inside, every nerve on edge. I checked every room, every closet, but nothing seemed to be missing. I convinced myself I was being paranoid. A few nights later, I was walking home, and I felt that familiar sensation of being followed. I picked up my pace, glancing over my shoulder, but I didn't see anyone. I reached my building and hurried inside, locking the door behind me. I leaned against it, trying to calm my racing heart. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "You look scared," it said. My blood ran cold. I didn't reply, but my phone buzzed again. "I can see you." I looked around, trying to figure out where he was watching from, but I couldn't see anything unusual. I called the police, but without any concrete evidence, there wasn't much they could do. They advised me to stay with someone for a few nights, but I didn't have family nearby, and I didn't want to burden my friends. So I stayed, jumping at every noise, barely sleeping. The breaking point came one night when I heard my front door creak open. I had put a chair against it, and the noise woke me up. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering to the operator as I hid under the bed. I could hear footsteps in my apartment, slow and deliberate. The operator stayed on the line with me, and I could hear the sirens approaching. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment, there was silence. Then I heard the door close. The police arrived and searched the building, but they didn't find anyone. Whoever it was had slipped away. I moved out the next day, staying with a friend until I found a new place. I never found out who it was or why they targeted me. It still haunts me, knowing that someone was watching me, knew my every move, and could have done something far worse if I hadn't called for help. I've got a story for you that's still fresh in my mind. It happened a few months ago when I decided to take a solo trip to a cabin in the woods. I needed a break from the city and thought a weekend getaway in nature would be perfect. The cabin was pretty remote, about a 30-minute drive from the nearest town, and it was surrounded by dense forest. It sounded like paradise at first. The first day was great. I spent my time hiking, reading, and just soaking in the peace and quiet. The sound of the rain on the roof was soothing, and I felt more relaxed than I had in a long time. But that night, things took a turn. I was lying in bed, listening to the rain and the occasional hoot of an owl, when I heard something else, footsteps on the porch. At first, I thought it might be an animal, but the steps were too deliberate, too human. My heart started pounding, and I lay there, straining to hear more. The footsteps stopped, and I heard the faint sound of the doorknob rattling. Someone was trying to get in. I quietly got out of bed and grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a fireplace poker. I crept towards the front door, trying to stay as quiet as possible. The doorknob stopped rattling, and for a moment, there was complete silence. Then, I heard a window being pried open. My stomach dropped. There was no cell service out here, and the nearest neighbor was miles away. I tiptoed towards the window, my grip tightening on the poker. I saw a shadowy figure trying to force the window open with a crowbar. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. I considered yelling, but I didn't want to provoke him. Instead, I slowly backed away and headed for the back door. If I could make it to my car, I might be able to get away. As I reached the back door, I heard the window shatter. Panic set in, but I forced myself to stay calm. I opened the door as quietly as I could and slipped outside. The rain was coming down hard, and I was instantly soaked. I made my way around the side of the cabin, sticking close to the shadows. The car was parked about 50 feet away, and it felt like the longest distance I'd ever had to cover. I finally reached the car and fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking. I could hear the intruder moving around inside the cabin, and I knew I didn't have much time. I managed to unlock the door and slid into the driver's seat, locking the doors behind me. I started the car, and the headlights illuminated the front of the cabin. That's when I saw him, a man, dressed in dark clothes, standing on the porch, staring right at me. I didn't wait to see what he'd do next. I threw the car into reverse and sped down the dirt road, my heart pounding. I didn't stop until I reached the town and found a gas station. I told the clerk what had happened, and he called the police. They went to check the cabin, but by the time they got there, the intruder was gone. I never went back to that cabin, and I still get chills thinking about how close I came to facing him. It's a reminder that sometimes, the scariest things aren't in our imaginations, but right in front of us. I'm driving alone down a desolate road, trying to find my way home. The sound of rain hitting the roof of my car is the only thing keeping me company. Suddenly, I see a sign for Willow Creek and decide to take a detour, thinking it might be a shortcut. As I drive deeper into the woods, the rain gets heavier, making it hard to see. I slow down and squint my eyes, trying to make out the road ahead. That's when I notice a figure standing by the side of the road. I stop the car, feeling a mix of curiosity and unease. I roll down the window and call out, asking if they need help. The figure turns towards me, revealing a ghostly face. My heart skips a beat as I realize I'm face to face with a spirit. It disappears in an instant, leaving me feeling cold and terrified. Ignoring my instincts, I decide to investigate further. I follow a narrow path that leads to an old, decrepit house. The rain continues to pour, adding to the eerie atmosphere. I step inside cautiously, feeling the weight of the past pressing down on me. As I explore the house, I hear whispers and footsteps, even though I'm the only one there. Shadows dance on the walls, and a cold breeze brushes against my skin. I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. The night grows darker, and the rain intensifies. Thunder rumbles in the distance, echoing through the empty halls. I stumble upon an old diary, its pages yellowed with age. It tells the story of a tragic death that occurred in this very house, and how the spirit of the deceased still lingers, seeking revenge. Suddenly, the lights go out, plunging me into darkness. Panic sets in as I fumble for my phone, the only source of light I have. Shadows move and shift, and I feel a presence closing in on me. I can't escape the feeling that I'm not alone. With every passing minute, the terror escalates. The rain outside pounds on the windows, as if begging me to leave. But I'm trapped, surrounded by a malevolent force that wants me gone. As I make a desperate attempt to escape, the spirits of Willow Creek unleash their full fury. They chase me through the house, their wails filling the air. I run as fast as my trembling legs can carry me, desperate to survive. I burst out of the front door and into the rain-soaked night. Gasping for breath, I take one last look at the house before running back to my car. The spirits may have haunted Willow Creek, but they won't haunt me anymore. I'm hiking alone in a dense forest, the rain making the leaves glisten and the ground slippery. The sound of raindrops hitting the foliage creates a soothing backdrop, but little do I know, this hike is about to take a horrifying turn. As I venture deeper into the forest, the trees grow thicker and more oppressive. The rain intensifies, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. The path becomes treacherous, and I begin to question my decision to go hiking in this weather. That's when I notice it, a strange silence. The usual sounds of nature, the chirping birds and rustling leaves, are absent. It's as if the forest itself is holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Unease settles in my gut, but I push forward, determined to finish what I started. As I walk, I notice peculiar markings on the trees, symbols that look like they were carved by a knife. They lead me off the main path and into the heart of the forest. With each step, the silence grows thicker, suffocating me. The rain continues to pour, creating a wall of sound that only amplifies the eerie stillness. I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched, that unseen eyes are following my every move. Suddenly, I stumble upon a clearing, and my heart sinks. In the center, there's a circle of stones, arranged meticulously. The air feels heavy with ancient energy, and I realize I've stumbled upon a place of dark rituals. Fear grips me, but I can't turn back now. I have to find my way out of this nightmare. I try to retrace my steps, but the forest seems to shift and change around me, leading me in circles. Panic sets in as I realize I'm trapped in this silent, malevolent forest. Time loses all meaning as I wander aimlessly, the rain soaking me to the bone. The silence becomes deafening, driving me to the edge of madness. Shadows dance in the corners of my vision, whispering secrets I can't decipher. Just when I think I can't take it anymore, the rain suddenly stops, and the forest comes alive. The trees sway in an unnatural rhythm, and the ground trembles beneath my feet. I watch in horror as the symbols on the trees begin to glow, their eerie light illuminating the darkness. In a desperate bid for survival, I run as fast as I can, following the fading light of the symbols. The forest fights against me, branches clawing at my skin, but I refuse to give up. I burst out of the forest, gasping for air, my heart pounding in my chest. As I leave the silent forest behind, I can't help but wonder what secrets it holds. But one thing's for sure, I'll never venture into its depths again. Here's the deal, I'm a thrill seeker, always looking for the next adrenaline rush. So when I heard about an abandoned asylum rumored to be haunted, I couldn't resist. On a rainy night, armed with a flashlight and a sense of adventure, I entered the decaying building. The rain patters against the broken windows, creating an eerie symphony. The air is heavy with the scent of dampness and decay. I walk through the hallways cautiously, my footsteps echoing through the empty space. As I explore, I come across old patient files scattered on the floor. They tell tales of mistreatment and suffering, painting a grim picture of the asylum's dark past. Each step I take reveals more horrors, making my skin crawl. Suddenly, I hear a faint whisper, barely audible above the rain. I freeze, straining my ears to listen. The whisper grows louder, filling the air with a sense of dread. It's as if the spirits of the asylum are trying to communicate with me. Ignoring my instincts, I follow the sound deeper into the building. The hallways twist and turn, leading me to rooms filled with broken furniture and remnants of the past. Shadows dance on the walls, playing tricks on my mind. With every passing minute, the whispers grow more urgent. I feel a presence closing in on me, watching my every move. Fear grips me, but I can't turn back now. I have to face whatever awaits me in this haunted asylum. As I reach the heart of the building, the rain outside intensifies, as if mirroring the terror within. The whispers become louder, merging into a cacophony of voices. I cover my ears, trying to block out the haunting chorus. Then, in a flash of lightning, I see them, the ghosts of the asylum. Their hollow eyes bore into my soul, their pale figures hovering just out of reach. They reach out, their translucent hands grasping for me, desperate to make contact. In a blind panic, I race towards the exit, stumbling through the darkened hallways. The ghosts pursue me, their moans and wails filling the air. I can feel their cold breath on my neck, their presence seeping into my very being. I burst out of the asylum, rain soaking me to the bone. I collapse on the ground, gasping for air, grateful to have escaped the clutches of the haunted building. The rain washes away the lingering fear, but the memories of that night will forever haunt me. I used to take the late-night train home from work, one of those old, creaky trains where the seats are worn and the lights flicker every now and then. It was usually pretty empty at that hour, which I liked because it gave me some quiet time to unwind after a long day. One night, it was raining heavily, and the sound of the rain pelting the train windows was oddly soothing. I was the only one in my carriage, or so I thought. I settled into my seat and pulled out a book, but something felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I glanced around and saw a man sitting a few rows ahead, staring straight ahead, not moving. He was dressed in dark, ragged clothes, and his face was partially hidden by the hood of his jacket. I didn't think much of it at first, maybe he was just another tired commuter. But as the train clattered along the tracks, I noticed something strange. He wasn't swaying with the movement of the train like everyone else usually does. He was unnaturally still. I tried to focus on my book, but my eyes kept drifting back to him. The train made a stop, and the lights flickered. When they came back on, the man was gone. I felt a wave of relief, thinking he had gotten off. But then I heard a noise behind me, a faint, rhythmic tapping. I turned around slowly, and there he was, sitting just a few seats away, staring directly at me. His eyes were hollow, and there was something not quite right about his face, like it was a mask. My heart pounded in my chest, and I forced myself to look away, telling myself it was just my imagination. The train stopped again, and I heard the doors open and close, but I didn't see anyone get on or off. The tapping stopped, but the sense of dread didn't. I kept my eyes fixed on my book, pretending to read, but I could feel his gaze on me. When the train finally reached my stop, I grabbed my bag and practically ran to the doors. I glanced back once more and saw the man standing up, slowly walking towards me. I bolted out of the train and into the rain, my heart racing. I didn't stop running until I reached my apartment. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the events in my head, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the man on the train was something more than just a creepy passenger. I never took that late-night train again, and to this day, the sound of rain on a train window sends chills down my spine. This happened to me last year when I was traveling for work. I was staying at this old hotel in a small town, the kind with a lot of character but also a lot of creaks and groans. It was raining heavily the night I checked in, and the sound of the rain against the windows was the only thing that kept me company. My room was on the top floor, and it had this eerie vibe to it. The furniture was old, and the wallpaper was peeling in places. I tried to brush off the feeling of unease and settled into bed, hoping to get some rest before my big meeting the next day. Around midnight, I was woken up by a strange noise. It sounded like whispering, but I couldn't make out the words. I sat up in bed, straining to hear where it was coming from. It seemed to be coming from the corner of the room, near the old wardrobe. I told myself it was just the wind or the rain playing tricks on my mind, but the whispering continued. I got up and walked towards the wardrobe, my heart pounding in my chest. As I got closer, the whispering stopped. I opened the wardrobe, half expecting to find someone hiding inside, but it was empty. I went back to bed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I turned off the light and tried to sleep, but then I heard a loud bang. I jumped up and turned on the light, but there was nothing there. I checked the door and the windows, but they were all locked. I called the front desk and told them about the noises, but they assured me that I was the only one on that floor. They offered to move me to another room, but I was too scared to leave my room in the middle of the night. I decided to stay put and try to get some sleep. But the noises didn't stop. I heard footsteps outside my door, the sound of someone trying the doorknob, and more whispering. I was terrified, but I stayed in bed, clutching the covers and hoping it would all go away. When morning finally came, I packed my bags and checked out as quickly as I could. I told the front desk about my experience, and they gave me a sympathetic look. They told me that the hotel had a long history and that many guests had reported strange occurrences over the years. I never went back to that hotel, and I avoid old, creepy places whenever I travel now. The memory of that night still haunts me, and the sound of rain always brings it rushing back. This story is from when I was in college. My friends and I loved exploring abandoned places, and one night, we decided to check out an old factory on the outskirts of town. It had been shut down for years and had a reputation for being haunted. It was a rainy night, and we thought it would be the perfect time to go ghost hunting. We parked our car a little way down the road and made our way to the factory. The rain was pouring down, and the place looked even more ominous in the dark. We had flashlights, but they did little to cut through the thick darkness inside the factory. As we explored, we joked around, trying to scare each other. But then, we heard a noise, a loud bang, like something heavy had been dropped. We froze, shining our flashlights in the direction of the sound. There was nothing there, just old machinery and debris. We tried to laugh it off, but the mood had shifted. We continued exploring, but we were all on edge. Then, we heard footsteps echoing through the empty halls. They didn't sound like they were coming from any of us. We stood still, listening, and the footsteps stopped. We decided it was time to leave, but as we made our way back to the entrance, we realized we were lost. The factory was like a maze, and everything looked the same in the dark. We kept hearing noises, whispers, footsteps, the sound of metal scraping against metal. It felt like we were being watched. We found our way back to the entrance, but it was blocked. A large piece of machinery had fallen, and there was no way to move it. Panic set in as we tried to find another way out. The noises grew louder, and the air felt heavy, almost suffocating. We split up, hoping to find an exit faster, but that only made things worse. I was alone, shining my flashlight in every direction, my heart racing. I heard footsteps behind me and turned around, but there was no one there. The whispers grew louder, and I felt a cold breath on my neck. I ran, not caring which direction I was going, just wanting to get out. I finally found a small window and managed to climb through. I fell into the mud outside, gasping for breath. My friends were already outside, looking as terrified as I felt. We didn't speak as we got back to the car and drove away. We never went back to that factory, and we stopped exploring abandoned places altogether. The memory of that night still haunts me, and the sound of rain always brings it back. I decided to take a solo trip to a cabin in the forest. I needed some time away from everything, and the idea of a peaceful weekend in nature sounded perfect. The cabin was remote, surrounded by dense trees, and the only sounds were the birds and the rustling of leaves. It was raining the night I arrived, and the sound of the rain was calming. I unpacked my things and settled in, enjoying the solitude. But as the night wore on, I started feeling uneasy. It was too quiet, almost oppressive. I brushed it off, telling myself I was just not used to the isolation. Around midnight, I was reading a book by the fireplace when I heard a noise outside. It sounded like footsteps crunching on the gravel path. I got up and looked out the window, but I couldn't see anything in the darkness. I told myself it was just an animal and went back to my book. But then I heard it again, closer this time. My heart started pounding, and I grabbed a flashlight. I opened the door and shone the light outside, but there was nothing there. The rain was coming down hard, and the forest was dark and silent. I closed the door and locked it, trying to shake off the feeling of dread. I decided to go to bed, hoping the rain would lull me to sleep. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I kept hearing noises, footsteps, branches snapping, whispers. I finally fell asleep, but I was woken up by a loud bang. It sounded like it was coming from the back of the cabin. I grabbed the flashlight and slowly made my way to the back door. The rain was still pouring, and the sound of it hitting the roof was deafening. I opened the door and shone the flashlight outside. There was nothing there, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I closed the door and locked it, deciding to wait until morning to investigate further. When I woke up, the rain had stopped, and the forest was eerily silent. I went outside to see if I could find any signs of what had made the noise, but there was nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing. It was like it had never happened. I cut my trip short and left the cabin that day. The feeling of being watched stayed with me, and I couldn't shake the fear that something was out there, watching me. I've never gone back to that cabin, and I avoid remote places now. The memory of that night still haunts me, and the sound of rain always brings it back. When I was in college, I used to love studying late at night in the campus library. It was quiet, and I could get a lot of work done without distractions. But one night, I had an experience that changed my love for the library forever. It was raining heavily, and the library was almost empty. I found a secluded corner on the top floor and settled in with my books. The sound of the rain against the windows was soothing, and I quickly got absorbed in my work. After a while, I needed a break, so I got up to stretch my legs. As I walked through the aisles of books, I thought I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, but there was no one there. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just the building settling. I went back to my desk, but the feeling of being watched was unsettling. I tried to focus on my work, but I kept glancing over my shoulder. Then I heard it again, footsteps, soft and slow, coming from the aisle behind me. I turned around, but again, there was no one there. I was starting to get creeped out, so I decided to pack up and leave. As I was gathering my things, I heard a whisper. It was faint, but it sounded like it was right next to me. My heart started racing, and I quickly threw my books into my bag. As I walked towards the exit, the lights started flickering. The footsteps were louder now, echoing through the empty library. I broke into a run, not caring if I looked ridiculous. I just wanted to get out of there. I reached the exit and pushed the door open, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in as I tried to force it open. The footsteps were right behind me now, and I could feel a cold breath on my neck. I turned around, ready to confront whatever was there, but there was nothing. The door finally gave way, and I ran out into the rain. I didn't stop running until I was back in my dorm room, drenched and out of breath. I told my friends what had happened, but they just laughed it off, saying I had imagined it. I never went back to the library at night. The memory of that night still haunts me, and the sound of rain always brings it back. A few years ago, when I was on a road trip with my dog Max, we were driving through a remote area, and it was getting late. The rain was pouring down, making it hard to see the road. I decided to find a place to pull over and wait out the storm. I found a small, empty rest stop and parked the car. Max and I got out to stretch our legs, but something about the place felt off. It was too quiet, and the rain seemed to muffle all other sounds. I decided we should just wait in the car until the rain let up. As we sat there, I noticed a figure standing by the edge of the woods. It was hard to see through the rain, but it looked like a person, just standing there, not moving. I felt a chill run down my spine and locked the doors. Max started growling, staring intently at the figure. I tried to calm him down, but he wouldn't stop. The figure began to move, slowly walking towards us. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I started the car and turned on the headlights. The figure was closer now, and I could see that it was a man, dressed in dark clothes, with a hood covering his face. He was walking straight towards us, and I knew we had to get out of there. I put the car in reverse and sped out of the rest stop, the man disappearing into the darkness behind us. We drove for what felt like hours, the rain never letting up. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the man following us. Finally, we found a small motel and decided to stay there for the night. I didn't sleep well, and the memory of that night still haunts me. I don't know who the man was or what he wanted, but the look in his eyes as he walked towards us was something I'll never forget. The sound of rain always brings it back, and I avoid remote rest stops whenever I'm on the road. This happened when I was a kid. My family used to visit my grandparents' farmhouse every summer. It was a beautiful old house surrounded by fields and woods, but there was something about it that always made me uneasy, especially at night. One summer, we were visiting during a particularly rainy season. The rain would come down in sheets, and the sound of it hitting the old roof was almost deafening. One night, during a heavy storm, I woke up to a strange noise coming from downstairs. I crept out of bed and tiptoed down the stairs, trying to be as quiet as possible. The noise was coming from the kitchen, and it sounded like someone was moving around. I peeked around the corner and saw a figure standing by the kitchen table. At first, I thought it was my grandpa, but then I realized the figure was too tall and thin. I felt a wave of fear wash over me, and I backed away slowly, hoping not to be noticed. But then, the figure turned and looked right at me. I couldn't see their face clearly, but their eyes were cold and menacing. I ran back upstairs and hid under my bed, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear footsteps coming up the stairs, slow and deliberate. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't find me. The footsteps stopped outside my door, and I could see the shadow of feet under the door. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps moved away, and I heard the creak of the stairs as the figure went back downstairs. I stayed under my bed until morning, too scared to move. When I finally got up the courage to go downstairs, the kitchen was empty, and there was no sign of anyone being there. I told my grandparents what had happened, but they said it was probably just my imagination. But I knew what I had seen, and the memory of that night still haunts me. The farmhouse feels different now, and I can't shake the feeling of dread that comes over me every time it rains. This incident happened to me when I was traveling alone in a foreign city. It was late at night, and I found myself wandering through dimly lit streets, searching for my hotel. Suddenly, a man appeared out of nowhere. He was tall, with a long coat that seemed to blend into the shadows. His face was obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, and his eyes shone with an unsettling intensity. Feeling uneasy, I quickened my pace, hoping to lose him in the labyrinth of narrow alleys. But no matter how fast I walked, he was always a few steps behind, his presence lingering like a shadow. Desperate, I ducked into a crowded cafe, hoping to find safety in numbers. As I looked around, relief washed over me. The mysterious stranger was nowhere in sight. It seemed like I had finally escaped his clutches. But just as I was about to order a coffee, I heard a voice behind me. It was him. He had found me again. His voice was low and menacing, sending chills down my spine. He spoke in a language I couldn't understand, his words dripping with malice. Terrified, I ran out of the cafe, my heart pounding in my chest. I sprinted through the empty streets, desperately seeking refuge. The city seemed unfamiliar and hostile, its alleys twisting and turning like a never-ending maze. I stumbled upon a police station. I burst through the doors, gasping for breath, and explained the situation to the officers. They looked at each other, exchanging worried glances. One of the officers informed me that the man I had encountered was a notorious criminal, wanted for a string of violent crimes. He had been evading capture for years, always one step ahead of the law. Shaken to my core, I realized how fortunate I was to have escaped unharmed. The memory of that night still haunts me, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk in the most unexpected places. So I decided to explore an abandoned hospital that had been shut down for years. I know, it sounds like a bad idea, but I couldn't resist the thrill of the unknown. As I stepped inside, the air was heavy with an eerie silence. The walls were peeling, and the corridors stretched out like a maze. Broken glass and discarded medical equipment littered the floors, a haunting reminder of the past. As I ventured deeper into the hospital, the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive. The flickering lights cast eerie shadows on the walls, and the sound of my own footsteps seemed to echo endlessly. Then, I heard it. A faint whisper, barely audible, coming from one of the rooms. My curiosity got the better of me, and I followed the sound. The door creaked open, revealing a patient's room frozen in time. The bed was still made, as if waiting for its occupant to return. The walls were covered in faded drawings, a poignant reminder of the hopes and dreams that once filled this place. But then, I noticed something unsettling, a message etched into the wall, written in what appeared to be blood. Fear gripped me as I read the words, "They never left." My heart raced, and I felt a presence, as if someone was watching me. I turned around, but the room was empty. Or so I thought. As I made my way back to the entrance, a chilling breeze brushed against my skin. I could hear whispers all around me, growing louder and more menacing with each step. Panic set in, and I ran as fast as I could, desperate to escape the clutches of the abandoned hospital. When I finally emerged into the daylight, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. But the memory of that hospital still lingers, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can consume even the most sterile of places. You wouldn't believe it, rain slicking the streets like spilled oil, reflecting the city's neon glow in a million tiny puddles. Halloween night, right? Perfect for a dumb scavenger hunt with friends. Except Sarah, bless her manic heart, dragged us to this creepy antique shop. Dust motes danced in the weak light, everything smelled like forgotten dreams and old incense. We shuffled through the clutter, Sarah practically vibrating with anticipation. In the back, lit by a single flickering bulb, it hung, the smiling mask. White porcelain, stretched into a grotesquely wide grin. Black eye sockets stared back, and the smile, oh man, the smile. It seemed to radiate pure, malevolent joy. A price tag dangled, the faded script barely visible, one wish. One price. Sarah, eyes gleaming, practically lunged at it. Up close, it was even worse. Tiny cracks ran like spiderwebs across the surface, and the porcelain felt cold and clammy beneath my touch. Just a spooky story, I mumbled, trying to convince myself more than you. Let's get out of here. But Sarah wouldn't budge. One wish, she kept muttering, imagine the possibilities. Then, the bulb flickered and died, plunging us into darkness. Panic clawed at my throat as we stumbled around, bumping into dusty furniture, our frantic breaths echoing in the suffocating gloom. A sound pierced the darkness, a high-pitched giggle, childish and unsettling, coming from where the mask hung. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Did you hear that? I wanted to ask, but the words stuck in my throat. Another giggle, closer this time, followed by a scraping sound. Something was dragging across the floorboards. We huddled together, fear turning our limbs to lead. Then, a faint light flickered back to life. The mask. But it wasn't on the stand anymore. It lay on the floor, its painted grin wider somehow, more malevolent. That's when it hit me, the price of a wish. Sarah, her face contorted in terror, clawed at the mask, but it was too late. It became one with her, the grotesque grin replacing her own. I ran. Didn't look back. The rain was a relentless curtain behind me, but it couldn't wash away the memory. Sarah, a puppet with the smiling mask's horrifying grin forever etched on her face. A cautionary tale, wouldn't you say? Some wishes come at a terrible cost. Rain lashed against the taxi window, blurring the neon lights of the city into an impressionistic mess. Stuck late at work, I booked a ride-sharing app with a sigh of relief. A white sedan, just like the app said, pulled up in front of the building. Relief washed over me as I climbed into the back seat. The stale air inside the car was thick and oppressive, and the driver remained shrouded in darkness, his figure barely visible in the rearview mirror. A strange unease settled in my stomach, a prickling sensation that crawled up my spine. The car started, navigating the slick streets with an unsettling smoothness. I glanced at my phone, the route wasn't right. We weren't following the usual path home. Panic surged through me, cold and sharp. I tapped the app, a frantic need to cancel the ride gnawing at me. But the app had glitched. No internet connection. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. This isn't the way, I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. The driver remained silent, his shadowed figure an unsettling presence in the front seat. My unease escalated to full-blown panic. "Hey, where are you taking me?" I demanded, my voice cracking with fear. The car continued its smooth journey, turning into a deserted part of town. Abandoned buildings, their windows like vacant eyes, loomed over the darkened streets. Overgrown lots, choked with weeds and skeletal trees, lined the deserted road. I fumbled with my phone, a desperate need to contact someone, anyone. But the lack of signal rendered it useless. Tears pricked my eyes as I realized my mistake. I wasn't in a ride-sharing car, I was trapped in a vehicle hurtling towards an unknown destination. The silence stretched on, broken only by the rhythmic drumming of the rain on the roof. A cold sweat slicked my skin, and I could taste fear metallic on my tongue. Desperate for any shred of control, I fumbled in my purse, pulling out a travel-sized bottle of hand sanitizer. It wasn't much, but it was the only weapon I had. As the car lurched to a stop in front of a dilapidated building, its paint peeling and windows boarded shut, I gripped the sanitizer bottle tightly in my trembling hand. The driver's door creaked open, and a figure emerged from the shadows. Tall and gaunt, it wore a long, dark coat that seemed to swallow him whole. His face, obscured by the brim of a wide-brimmed hat, remained hidden. He didn't speak, just gestured towards the building with a skeletal hand. Terror choked back a scream. There was no way I was getting out of the car, not with that thing waiting for me. But the driver remained silent, his shadowed figure an imposing threat. My breath hitched as he reached into his coat pocket, and for a sickening moment, I thought he was pulling out a weapon. Instead, he retrieved a single, flickering lighter. He held it up, the tiny flame casting an eerie glow on his bony hand. A low, guttural growl emanated from within the building, a sound that sent shivers down my spine and made the hair on my arms stand on end. The driver pointed the lighter towards the building, the flame flickering wildly. The growl intensified, morphing into a blood-curdling shriek. A dark shape surged from the shadows, its form shifting and melding like smoke in the wind. The driver threw the lighter, the flame arcing through the air before landing at the creature's feet. It recoiled with a hiss, the unearthly shriek morphing into a series of shrieks and screeches. The driver turned towards me, his shadowed face unreadable. For a brief moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, maybe pity, maybe something else entirely. Then, with a jerk of his head, he gestured back towards the car. Hesitantly, I climbed out, the rain chilling me to the bone. The driver didn't move, his gaze fixed on the writhing shadow in the building's doorway. Taking a deep breath, I sprinted away, the sound of the creature's shrieks echoing behind me. I didn't look back. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. Finally, I stumbled into a brightly lit diner, collapsing onto a stool, gasping for breath. The warmth and the smell of greasy food were a welcome comfort. But the image of the driver, facing down that creature with a single lighter, remained burned into my memory. Who was he? And why did he save me? The answers, if there were any, were lost in the darkness of that night. The rain eventually stopped, but the chilling memory of my ride-sharing nightmare lingered on, a stark reminder of the unseen dangers that lurk in the shadows. The rain lashed against the window pane, a relentless symphony of drumming on the aging glass. It was the kind of rain that blurred the neon glow of the city outside into a watercolor mess, perfect for curling up with a good book and a steaming mug of tea. Except, tonight, the power flickered, then died completely, plunging my tiny apartment into an oppressive darkness. Panic, a cold serpent, coiled in my stomach. My phone, clutched tightly in my clammy hand, was the only source of light, its screen displaying a rapidly dwindling battery notification. The silence, thick and suffocating, was broken only by the insistent drumming of the rain and the occasional creak and groan of the old building settling around me. Minutes bled into what felt like hours. The darkness pressed in on me, a physical weight threatening to crush the air from my lungs. Every rustle of fabric from my clothes sounded amplified, every creak of the floorboard sent shivers cascading down my spine. I strained to hear, to see, anything that could explain the unsettling feeling that had taken root in the pit of my stomach. Then, a sound pierced the suffocating silence. A soft thud from the hallway outside my apartment door. It was followed by the unmistakable sound of something heavy being dragged across the floorboards. My heart lurched into a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The sound grew closer, each agonizing drag punctuated by a sickening scrape. Panic choked any sound from my throat. I fumbled for a drawer, my trembling fingers finally grasping a forgotten box of matches. With shaking hands, I struck a match, its flickering flame casting grotesque shadows that danced manically across the walls. The meager light illuminated a corner of the room far from the door, offering little comfort but enough to see by. I blew out the match, plunging myself back into the suffocating darkness. The dragging sound stopped just outside my door. Silence. A tense, suffocating silence that stretched on for an eternity. Then, a muffled thump, as if something heavy had slammed against the wood. My breath hitched in my throat. Was someone trying to break in? Terror threatened to consume me whole. I huddled in the corner farthest from the door, knees pulled to my chest, tears of fear stinging my eyes. The silence stretched on, broken only by the rain and my ragged gasps for breath. It felt like an eternity before a flicker of light caught my eye. Then another. Power. The harsh fluorescent lights flooded the room, chasing away the shadows and revealing the empty hallway outside my door. No sign of the dragging sound, no sign of anything. Exhausted but terrified, I sank to the floor, the adrenaline slowly draining from my body. Was it just my imagination, fueled by the darkness and the storm outside? Or was there something lurking in the shadows, something that preyed on fear and darkness, waiting for the next blackout? Sleep, a comforting escape, felt miles away. The rain continued its relentless drumming, now a chilling reminder of my vulnerability in the dark. Rain pounded the pool house roof, blending with the rhythmic splash of the water. A solo swim in the indoor pool, a relaxing evening, right? The storm outside transformed it into something unsettling. The power flickered, momentarily plunging the pool area into darkness. Panic surged. The silence held only the rain and my own frantic breathing. Light returned, revealing a distorted mass of limbs pulsing with an unnatural glow beneath the water's surface. Terror turned my legs to lead. I stumbled back, tripping over a lounge chair and landing hard on the wet floor. A monstrous shape emerged from the water, dripping and undulating. It was vaguely humanoid, but with far too many limbs and skin that stretched like black rubber. The creature lurched towards me, its movements unnatural, unsettlingly fluid. I scrambled back, the wet floor offering no traction. The smell hit me then, a sickening mix of chlorine and decay. The creature reached for me, multiple limbs grasping at the air. My scream died in my throat. Just as its cold, slimy hand brushed my skin, the lights flickered once more. Darkness. Silence. My ragged breaths filled the air. The rain continued its relentless strumming. Was it gone? Had I imagined it? Or was it still there, lurking in the darkness, waiting for the next flicker of light? The rain gave a relentless performance on the attic roof, each drop a tiny drumbeat against the decaying wood. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight that slanted through the grimy window, illuminating the cluttered space like a spotlight in a forgotten stage play. Among the cobwebs and broken furniture, a single object caught my eye, a full-length mirror propped precariously against a dusty wardrobe. It was ornately framed, carved with swirling figures that seemed to writhe and twist in the shifting light. Despite its age, the silver gleamed with an unnatural brightness, almost as if it held a light within itself. Curiosity sparked. I inched closer, drawn by an unseen force. As I brushed away a layer of dust, the air grew strangely stagnant, a charged silence settling over the attic. My reflection stared back, distorted slightly by the mirror's warped surface. But something was off. My eyes seemed a shade darker, my smile a little too wide. A shiver ran down my spine. Then, a whisper. Faint, barely audible, like the rustle of dead leaves. It seemed to come from the reflection itself. I leaned closer, straining to hear. The whisper came again, a voice that sounded eerily similar to my own, but tinged with a chilling malice. "Let me out," it hissed, the words echoing in the stillness. A wave of nausea washed over me. I stumbled back, heart hammering against my ribs. Was I imagining it? Had the isolation and the musty air of the attic finally gotten to me? But the voice spoke again, clearer this time, a desperate plea emanating from the mirror. "I'm trapped," it rasped, the words accompanied by a flicker of movement in the reflection. It was subtle, but undeniable. The image in the mirror seemed to shift ever so slightly, a flicker of despair in the shadowed eyes. Panic clawed at my throat. I didn't believe in ghosts or trapped spirits, but there was something undeniably unsettling about the mirror, a sense of malevolent presence that sent shivers down my spine. The rain outside picked up, its rhythm now a frantic counterpoint to the pounding of my heart. Driven by morbid curiosity, I reached out a trembling hand to touch the cool surface of the mirror. A jolt of electricity shot through my arm, making me gasp and pull back. The mirror pulsed with a faint light, and the reflection reached out, its hand mirroring my own movement. For a terrifying moment, our fingers seemed to touch through the glass. A sudden, horrifying cold consumed me, and a wave of despair, an alien emotion, flooded my mind. I ripped my hand away, the touch leaving a tingling sensation on my skin. The reflection remained, its face twisted in a mask of fury. "Let me out," it screamed, the sound echoing through the attic, shattering the silence. The mirror pulsed with a blinding light, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought it might shatter, releasing whatever entity resided within. Then, as abruptly as it began, the light faded. The reflection returned to normal, the strange chill lifted. Shaken and drained, I left the attic, slamming the hatch shut behind me. The rain continued its relentless drumming, but it no longer sounded threatening, just a normal summer storm. I didn't go back to the attic that day, or the next. The image of the enraged reflection haunted my dreams, the chilling touch lingering on my skin. The mirror remained, a silent sentinel in the dusty attic, a constant reminder of the darkness that can lurk within the ordinary. The pouring rain had turned the hiking trail into a muddy mess, water sluicing down my rain gear in a steady stream. It wasn't the ideal weather for a solo hike, but I'd been itching to get out into the wilderness, to escape the city's suffocating noise. Now, several hours deep into the trail, and with the light fading rapidly, I was starting to regret my decision. The map I held in my hand was starting to look like a soggy mess, the paper flimsy and tearing in my rain-soaked fingers. A growing sense of unease settled in my stomach. I wasn't sure if I'd strayed from the path, or if the rain had simply washed away the markers. Then, a glint of metal caught my eye through the trees. Pushing aside some overhanging branches, I discovered a campsite, a half-pitched tent, a backpack abandoned on the wet ground, and a crumpled map lying open on a makeshift table. My heart hammered against my ribs. This clearly belonged to another hiker, and judging by the state of the camp, they'd left in a hurry. Panic flared in my chest. Had they gotten injured? Lost? Or was there something more sinister at play? The abandoned campsite felt strangely charged, a sense of unease clinging to the damp air. I scanned the map, hoping for a clue. It was the same map I had, but there was writing scrawled on it in frantic handwriting, coordinates circled in red, and the words "follow the stream." Don't stray. Intrigue battled with caution. Following a stranger's cryptic instructions in the fading light and worsening weather seemed reckless. But the thought of someone, possibly injured, alone in the woods, pushed me forward. Leaving a note under a rock to mark my own location, I pocketed the stranger's map and followed the gurgling stream deeper into the woods. The light dwindled rapidly, forcing me to rely on my headlamp. The forest floor grew denser, the trees forming a dark, tangled canopy overhead. The sound of rushing water grew louder, leading me to a cascading waterfall. Bathed in the ethereal glow of my headlamp, the scene held a strange beauty. But the feeling of unease intensified. The circled coordinates led to a small cave entrance hidden behind the cascading water. My breath hitched in my throat. A cave? In this weather? Was this truly the best course of action? But the thought of the missing hiker, alone and possibly injured, spurred me on. Pulling on my rain jacket tighter, I ducked into the cave, the cool, damp air a welcome change from the rain outside. The cave entrance narrowed quickly, forcing me to crawl on my hands and knees. The darkness was suffocating, broken only by the faint beam of my headlamp. The air grew thicker, carrying the faint scent of something metallic, something unsettling. Suddenly, the beam from my headlamp caught a glint of metal. Rounding a bend in the cave passage, I found it a backpack, identical to the one I'd seen at the campsite. But this one wasn't empty. A single, blood-stained boot lay abandoned beside it. A wave of nausea washed over me. Had the missing hiker met with foul play? Before I could react, a low growl echoed from deeper within the cave. The metallic tang in the air intensified, a sickening sweetness. Panic choked back a scream. My mind raced, the image of the circled coordinates flashing before my eyes. There were two options: follow the sound and confront whatever lurked in the darkness, or retreat and hope to find help. Just then, another growl, closer this time, sent shivers down my spine. There was no time for deliberation. Taking a deep breath, I adjusted my headlamp and pressed forward, following the sound deeper into the darkness, the promise of answers pulling me towards a terrifying unknown. It was after midnight, an hour usually reserved for deep sleep, but I found myself wide awake, a knot of unease twisting in my gut. The phone on the nightstand buzzed, shattering the stillness. The caller ID displayed an unknown number. Hesitantly, I picked up. Silence. No breathing, no static, just an unnerving emptiness. My heart hammered against my ribs. A wrong number maybe? But a prickling sensation crawled up my spine, a feeling that something was terribly wrong. I was about to hang up when a voice crackled through the receiver. It was a woman's voice, distorted and raspy, barely a whisper. She spoke a single sentence, a cryptic plea, "They're coming for me. Help me." Then, a choked sob and the line went dead. Terror washed over me. A wave of dizziness hit, and for a moment, the room spun. Who was that woman? Where was she? Was it a prank? My rational mind tried to dismiss it, but the raw fear in the woman's voice lingered, a chilling echo in the dead of night. I couldn't ignore it. Adrenaline surged through my veins, pushing aside the fear. I grabbed my phone and searched for the number. Nothing. No record, no trace. But the woman's voice, her desperate plea, wouldn't leave my head. The rain continued its relentless assault on the windows, each drop a drumbeat urging me on. Throwing on some clothes, I grabbed my keys and a flashlight. Despite the pounding rain, I raced out the door, the chilling memory of the voice pushing me forward. I didn't know where the woman was, but a strange intuition, a feeling I couldn't explain, guided my steps. The deserted streets were slick and treacherous, the wind howling through the bare branches of the trees like a mournful wail. Following a barely there feeling, I ended up in a forgotten part of town, a maze of abandoned buildings and decaying factories. The streetlights flickered erratically, casting long, grotesque shadows that danced in the wind. Suddenly, a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye. A figure, shrouded in darkness, darted into the shadows of an abandoned warehouse. Hope surged through me. Was it her? Clutching my flashlight tighter, I approached the building. The windows were boarded up, the paint peeling from the walls. The air hung heavy with the smell of decay and damp earth. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open a creaking door. The darkness inside was oppressive, broken only by the feeble beam of my flashlight. The floor was littered with debris, the silence broken only by the dripping of water and the frantic pounding of my heart. Then, a whimper. Faint, almost inaudible. I followed the sound, the flickering beam of my flashlight revealing a hidden staircase leading down into the darkness. Hesitantly, I descended, each creaking step amplifying the silence. The basement was a labyrinth of pipes and cobwebs, the air thick and stale. The whimpering sound grew louder, leading me to a small, barred cell at the back of the room. A woman, her face streaked with tears, huddled inside. Relief flooded me. It was her, the woman from the phone call. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with fear and relief. But before I could speak, a heavy metal door clanged shut at the top of the stairs. We were both trapped. Footsteps echoed on the rickety stairs, each step sending shivers down my spine. A lone figure emerged from the darkness, his face obscured by the shadows. The woman in the cell whimpered, her fear palpable. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his voice a low growl. Terror choked any sound from my throat. In that moment, I realized the horrifying truth. I hadn't come to rescue someone, I had walked into a nightmare. The rain continued its relentless drumming outside, a grim soundtrack to the terrifying scene unfolding before me. As the figure approached, the single flickering bulb above the cell sputtered and died, plunging us into darkness.